Question 2a is an 8-mark question which asks you about how useful are two sources, A and B, in the crime paper. The approach used here is exactly the same as the approach that you will need to use for paper 3 Germany. The only difference being that for paper 3 in Germany, it will be sources B and C. Now, this question about how useful are sources A and B, they're not actually asking you how useful sources A and B actually are. Because, let's be honest, if you were asking how useful a source is, you would assume that you're going to talk about the ways in which it is useful and the ways in which it isn't useful. Oh no. Edexcel are using this as a bit of a trap in order to try and catch you. Quick T reload there. So the first thing that we know is we are not talking about the ways in which it is not useful. No, no, no. We can only talk about useful. The reality is this question is actually asking us, in what way? Is the source useful? Remember, inquiry just simply means investigation. So don't fret too much on this front. Now, if you're using the booklet to help you out, I'm going to be working here with the first question, which is two sources on workhouses in Whitechapel. Just to help you out, you might want to have a look at this now. You can pause and you will see. Source A and source B. We're going to start by dealing with source A. Now, there is an important part to be mentioned here. This section here, which in the paper will hopefully be boxed, this is the actual source. This is where we're going to go to get content, and this is where we are going to do a lot of work pulling out a quote or two. This part here, this rubric, is actually your provenance. It tells you who the source was made by, in this case, Margaret Harkness. It tells you when it was made, 1889. It tells you a bit about Harkness. If it doesn't tell you in the exam anything about the person who made it, don't worry about it. And it tells you the place it's come from. And if we're trying to work out where in darkest London might be from, well, she's a journalist. And she writes novels. This question here possibly is using a source that might be about a novel or a newspaper article. Let's have a look at source B. Source B, again, is from a newspaper. It's 1869, so it's a little bit before the period we're dealing with. Remember, it's 1888. However, it's within about 20 years, so let's not worry too much about it. It tells us a little bit about it. Homeless and hungry. Illustrates an article about workhouses. It's people queuing for a workhouse. Content for pictures is always harder because obviously you're going to pick out a detail that we can see. So, for example, the fact that everybody looks miserable, the fact that the police are there overseeing it, the fact that we've got a man who looks quite well-to-do is obviously down on his luck. These sort of things are things we're going to bring up. Now, let's start. First and foremost, we have two sources. We have got source A and we have got source B. And this is really important. So let's start with source A. Source A, we are going to look at a couple of things. We are going to look at its provenance, which is its origin, its nature, and we're going to have a look at its content. What's in it? So here for source A, we know it's written by Margaret Harkness. Make sure that you spell these things correctly. They're in the paper, so give it there and use it. It was written in 1889. We are going to assume it's from a newspaper. And in terms of its content, it says the Whitechapel Union is a model workhouse. That's to say, it is the poor law incarnate in stone and brick. The men are not allowed to smoke in it, not even when they are in their dotage or old age. The young women never taste tea. The old ones may not indulge in a cup during the long afternoons, only at 6:30, morning and night, when they receive a small hunk of bread with butter scraped over the surface and a mug of that beverage which is so dear to their hearts as well as their stomachs. Young people never go out, never see a visitor, and the old ones are the only ones who get one holiday in the month. A little gruel, that's porridge, morning and night, meat twice a week. That is the food of the grown-up people, seasoned with hard work and prison discipline. And the question is asking us about an inquiry into workhouses. So we can talk about food is restricted, and we will use the quote, a small hunch of bread with butter scraped over the surface. Okay, first thing we need to do is we need to talk about why this would be useful. So Margaret Harkness, we know that she visited workhouses. Therefore, she is an eyewitness. It's 1889, which is from the time. It's a newspaper article. So although it can adjust facts maybe and emphasise, it must be based in truth. Because otherwise, people would say, well, you're making this up and your newspaper will lose customers. Now, content, this is the key bit. We need to talk about how this relates to our knowledge. And this is where your knowledge of, for example, workhouses comes in. So we know that workhouses were designed to be unappealing. So therefore, food was bad. The question is, does this match this? Yes, it does. So it would suggest it's a typical description. Let's have a look at source B now. Source B says it's a drawing by Samuel Luke Fields, published in a London newspaper, and we've got the people. So, provenance. I'm just going to call it prov here. We know it's by Samuel Fields. It's from 1869, and it's from a newspaper again. So, we don't know a lot about him. He may have possibly gone to see it. He might have made it up, but he's probably seen it or seen a similar thing. After all, you're not going to be able to draw a picture if you haven't got something as a reference. Again, this must be based in truth. And again, this is from the time. Now, you can notice we've got a bit of repetition here. That's not a disaster. but we could potentially link these two together. Content. Well, here we have ragged people looking miserable. And we have on the right a pensive woman with her child. I'll just show that one out to you. There she is. Right, acknowledge time. Well, people had to be desperate together. Families would be split up. And of course, you could only go there if you were desperate. So, does this match? Yes, it does, because families being split up, woman with child. We might suggest she's worried for her child. Now comes the write-up. So I'm not going to write out both answers because obviously it's a mirror copy. What we do for source A, we must do for source B. So I'm only going to model the answer here for source A. Remember, you're going to need to do this also for source B. So, we want to say, to begin with, that sources A and B are useful for an inquiry. Always use the words from the question. Into workhouses. For numerous reasons. Right, I've definitely told the examiner I'm answering the question. Right, let's start with this one. We're going to start with the provenance this time round. So, the provenance of source A. And remember, we've said that it's from Margaret Harkness. It's 1889 and it's a newspaper article. This is why we plan, people. I've got it in front of me. It's literally just up there, so I can work it, and here we go. The provenance of source A is that it is from Margaret Harkness, this is newspaper article in 1889. Okay, I need to be thinking now about how I'm going to link this one together. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to start by checking it out. This shows that it is from the time. Ooh, I've mentioned that. Is from a reliable source as newspapers would be based in truth. Notice I haven't said it's truth, I've said it's based in truth. A little nuance. And now it's Margaret Harkness, but we don't personally know Margaret. None of us are friends with Margaret, so we're going to use her surname, not her first name. And that Harkness was an eyewitness to her activism. Remember, it says in the rubric that she is a bit of a social reformer. Well, we've dealt with the provenance part, haven't we, really? That's fair enough. Right, let's tweak this now. Let's talk about the content. The content of source A well, I've made a mistake because I haven't actually linked this back to the question. I need to explain why this would be useful. So, this makes it useful because it will be typical of many workhouses at the time. There we are. I've solved that problem. Let's come back to the content of source A. Right, content of source A. Well, we've said that it talks about food. So the content of source A shows that food was restricted. And we're going to use our quote. A small hunch of bread with butter scraped over the surface. From my own knowledge, I know workhouses were designed to be as unappealing as possible. The food was deliberately bad and limited. This reflects the information in source A showing that the source is typical and comprehensive in its account. And then we would go the provenance of source B, and so on and such forth. It's not the end of the world if we miss this bit out, because we can always put this at the end. The key thing is planning it to a certain extent. Don't necessarily draft it out on a separate piece of paper. You'll have the source book separate, so you are very, very able to annotate up the sources as you see fit. Make sure you bring those highlighters. Highlight your key terms. Remember, in terms of the time for this question, you are not under the cosh. You've got 10 minutes to do this question. 10 minutes means effectively 5 minutes per source. It's not going to take you 5 minutes to write the source, not if we think it through and study the sources first. This is why we always think about making sure that we put notes down on paper to help us out, because doing that means little mistakes like that can be caught quite easily.